All right, so it's just shortly after 5, so we will get rolling with the artist talk. I'll do a little quick introduction of our wonderful artist. We're so happy to have Eryn here at the gallery. I'm very, very proud to present this latest body of works, Traveling Vicariously, the High Line. It's been quite a long adventure. I know Eryn has been working on the body of works for quite some time. So I'll give you a little introduction on Eryn for those of you who might be a bit newer to her practice. So Eryn is a very distinguished artist. She holds a BFA from the University of Halifax, NSCAD, and an MFA from the University of Waterloo, which she achieved in conjunction with her thesis exhibition, Restrictions of Routine. And she didn't stop there. She's currently pursuing her MA in Art and Architectural History at Carleton University. She's also had numerous solo and group exhibitions in Toronto, Ottawa, Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph, Hamilton, and Montreal. And her most recent solo exhibition, Ottawa Underground, held here at Full Space Gallery, took place in June of 2022. She's also participated in numerous artist residencies, including Vermont Studio Center in March of 2016 and the Golden Foundation Artist in Residence Program in March of 2019. So she is also a multiple Ontario Arts Council grant recipient and a 2-time recipient of the Elizabeth Greenfield Representational Painting Award. And Eryn also works have also been collected in the City of Ottawa's permanent collection, most recently shown in November of 2021. And last year, she was also collected by Global Affairs Canada. As you all may know, she works here in Ottawa and holds a spot at the Rectory Art House, which is where she completed this beautiful work. So I will hand it over to Eryn. We'll start off the top here, and then for question period, which we'll have at the end, we'll move over to the main gallery space. Everybody can see the full body of works. At that point, anybody attending on Zoom can feel free to also type any questions into the chat, and Ava, our wonderful help, will help relay those questions to Eryn. All right, Eryn, take it away.
Thank you so much. Great, thank you, Tiffany and Ava, and Phoebe who couldn't be here tonight. So I want to first thank All Space for the opportunity to have another exhibition in the gallery. This show definitely took a long time to complete with many different obstacles, so I'll give you all an overview of how this all came together. And thank you all for being here in person and online. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the High Line, it's a space in New York City. I'll give a little bit of background. So it's a continuous 1.45 mile or 2.33 kilometer elevated linear park. It was created on a former New York Railroad in the west side of Manhattan, originally built in the 1920s. The park runs from Gansevoort Street, connecting to now the Whitney Museum of Art, up through Chelsea and through the northern edge to the west, to West 34th Street. It was destined for demolition. However, in the early 2000s, there was a public outcry to salvage the structure. In 2009, the first section actually opened to the public from Gansevoort to 20th Street. And over the years, it's continually developed and continued to open. So it's now fully open to the public. I've been visiting for several years up until 2020, but I wasn't able to make it. So the concept for this exhibition, Traveling Vicariously, the High Line, stemmed from many lockdowns and continual barrier closures to the border. For this reason, I was forced to kind of embrace a vicarious living experience through a friend and collaborator who lives in New York. Familiar with my work from years past, he was able to offer photography through social media and through personal photos to actually do a collaborative show, it turned out. So this exhibition features works inspired by 2 years, pretty much, of archived imagery of New York. First, just that I was excited that someone I knew was living there, so we were sharing kind of experiences and life stories. And then it turned into sort of a really kind of condensed show. And I thought, well, Space is offering an exhibition. I have an idea of what I'm going to do for this. And it does speak directly to the kind of weird times we're going through, but it wasn't necessarily the only reason I wanted to do it. Been inspired by the High Line for several years. So So I've been traveling there since about 2010 to see the space over and over again. So this wasn't an unfamiliar space to me at all. This was something that I was very inspired by. So I knew right away this could be something I can continue to find. We have a tattoo of the Highlands. So that's from way back, another story, but so I've been a fan for a very long time. What I wanted to do was really celebrate his imagery as well as my perspective. So I sent him out kind of on his own a lot. He'd just take photos, send them. Other times I was a bit more specific of areas I really wanted to convey. So the show, as you can see, it's 10 pieces in total, taken from hundreds and hundreds of photos. So I had to kind of be very selective and editorial. But what it shows is pretty much a continuous experience. This is the spur, this is that. It does walk all the way through at some point, however, it's not really chronological. You can follow through these certain elements all the way through the entire exhibition. What I wanted to also highlight is both the new elements as well as some of the older features of New York, because one thing that's lovely about the city is that it's continued to keep its relics and its older buildings, as well as infiltrating these newer kind of intense infrastructure buildings. So some examples we'll walk through after show, as example one is called Concrete Facade. It's an old apartment building built within feet of the High Line. And what's lovely about it is that it still exists, it's still as it was, but around it is being kind of, filled in with newer and newer elements. And that to me is what makes New York kind of a unique space. It doesn't have a lot of land and yet continues to grow and build. Well, there were countless images, like I said. I was drawn to many for different reasons. One in particular, titled Under Construction, struck me immediately. First of all, it's the only one taken from street level. And through discussions with my friend in New York, I learned that it was a completely unplanned photo, taken on a walk he was taking towards the Hudson River for just a morning walk, or evening walk, I guess it would have been, since sunset. I couldn't resist because the scene spoke to me. He'd taken it with traffic cones and kind of an under construction element, which if anyone's familiar with my work, I have a certain affiliation with construction, pylons, and traffic cones. So this piece stuck out immediately, and I don't think he expected that it would make the show or that it would be one that I would celebrate. However, it's one of the ones that kind of stands out as a truly O'Neill piece. I'll briefly speak a bit about my methodology, but feel free to ask any other questions. Paintings are both acrylic and oil. I move back and forth between both mediums. As Tiffany mentioned, I did the Golden Foundation Artist Residency, where I learned a lot more how to handle acrylic paint. I was trained as an oil painter. However, I've learned that there's a lot to deal with both mediums, and it's actually quite exciting because some cases you want to be able to flip back and forth, and also just for different reasons of quicker drying. But I've also learned that there's a lot that acrylic can do. I also want to talk about my strong interest in architecture. So a lot of my work is, well, most of it actually, I would say all is fair statement, does not include people. I'm very fascinated by the elements in which pedestrians move through, and I want the viewer to be the main focus. So as you're standing here, you're putting yourself in the space. That way scale can be varied, and you're always seeing it from your own perspective as opposed to seeing the figure and relating to that person. So recapturing this space, both through my vision and providing photographs, bringing them to life, and provided an interesting challenge. My work is always from my own imagery. I run or walk as a pedestrian, and I take all these photos myself. So having to work for this way is a really interesting combination of many reasons, including support, encouragement, and a positivity through times of uncertainty and frustration. The motivation to create a body of work that shares the story of connectivity is at the core of this series. And that's something that's really important kind of to the whole story of it, is that it's two people kind of stuck on either side of the border, not that far away, but able to kind of create an entire show. And I was able to continue and work with Wallspace to be able to create this. So it's quite helpful. Another aside is that my work has been heavily influenced by Ottawa. So this was a lovely way to kind of bring myself back into another urban space. And I was able to get down there in late 2021. So I did make the trip and was able to take some of my own photos. But what was interesting is the ones that I was inspired by my own work didn't really always make it in. So there's only about one or two that really were kind of a combination of my photo with his as well. So there's a certain overlap. And one comment I got was that these paintings are very vibrant and really dialed up, someone said, with the palette. And I think that has a lot to do with using someone else's image. So that's an interesting perspective I didn't really consider until I put them all together. And they're taken at different times of day, often brighter times. He has a very professional camera sometimes to go out. So they're really intense photos, almost, I didn't even need to paint them. They were so perfect. And so when I'm doing them with paintings, I think I'm really aware of the hyper detail, whereas I take them snapshots with my phone. So it's kind of an interesting parallel there. So that's really the whole basis of this exhibition. I have worked with the Highline for years, like I said, so I took a break, didn't do any work for a couple of years with it, and now coming back, I've noticed how much it's changed around the entire area. There's Hudson Yards, which is around this part, that's an intensely dramatic kind of retail and office space that exists now that wasn't even there. I think the last time I was in New York was 2017. So the amount of intense growth speaks to that city too. It's quite a bit different, but the fact that they always are building for pedestrians. They even have something called Little Island that's built off into the Hudson, that's built off on the old derelict kind of deck or forts that were out there. So it's fascinating use of public urban space, which at the core of my work really comes to life. So I'll kind of stop there with the description because I want to go around a little bit and see some of the pieces, but I just want to thank everyone for coming, and I hope you really enjoy the exhibition, and please ask any questions. So thank you.
So we'll open up to questions both online and in person.
And if there's any works in particular too, there's some I spoke to and some I might be able to elaborate on a little bit further. So these two, this is the spur, like I said, this is at West 30th. It wasn't open. This is the first time I saw this section myself. This one is, if you actually are looking, this is on 10th Avenue. It's actually a lookout. So there's benches built on the High Line. So we're kind of on it, looking at an angle. So you can sit there and it's almost like a fake movie where you're just watching cars going through, but it's all glass. So it's kind of these old areas there. There's these old buildings mixed in with the newer ones. They had some classic traffic cones there. So yeah.
Yeah, why don't we switch over to the main interior gallery space and we can open everything up to questions. You can get a great view of the whole body of work. So sure. I can speak to any of them independently as well, which might offer some.
This one actually, I didn't mention it in the talk, but I'll mention it now. This one was one of the last ones I did, and it was taken as a combination of my photo as well. I'd taken a few from this angle because I really loved, this is Hudson Yards. They've kind of connected it almost literally to the High Line as an overpass, and it has this like glass facade, the actual wood benches that are really unique to the High Line. But I added that kind of like more muted palette that it definitely speaks to my work a lot more. And this was also December, so you can also see there's a lot of foliage in some because the photos were taken over years. So different every season, and this one speaks a lot more to the kind of December, even though it's more like October to us, but it was still a bit rainy, so I added that kind of feature to this one.
And I love that you touched on the different seasons, like
Yeah.
it gives a perspective of how much time has passed in the
Exactly,
process
yeah.
of capturing the show.
It never snowed, it maybe snowed very slightly, but not enough that it was, I could ever catch it in a painting, so there's none with snow, because I finished the show by the time it snowed there, so the show was already done. This is the one here, or actually, just, unless anyone, if there's interrupt, like this is the one from the street level. This is the construction piece that I mentioned that has the classic traffic cones. That was kind of the one that to me is the, I won't say odd one, but it's the one where you're on the street level. So you're seeing the structure, they're doing construction underneath. And this area kind of comes out in a jut. It does abruptly end, and then it wraps around, and in between that is actually the parking for the subway cars. So it's kind of an interesting element there, and it would wrap around to west to 34th. So this is at the opposite end to the way. And yeah, definitely a little bit more my
So we have a question on Zoom there. Do you have a favorite piece?
We're probably talking about it now. This one definitely was I'll say the most immediate one in terms of picking the photo. It was the one where I saw the photo and it was just sent. It wasn't really sent in a burst of photos of here's the highline, you know, here I went on a walk, here's 30 photos you can pick between. It was just a random photo in a conversation. And I kind of saved it, squirreled it away, and then painted it. And don't even think I mentioned at first that I was even working with this one. So I think this one is the one that I thought it's not quite as polished or as cleaned up. So that's what I kind of snuck it in almost.
Yeah,
You know,
and the
wasn't
title,
really-
Under Construction,
Under Construction,
kind of
yeah.
really ties that together.
And it also speaks to the fact that I've known the Highline for so long that it's always been under construction for me. I've never seen it in completion until very recently. So that's kind of an interesting element to it as well. So yeah.
So I'll ask you what's the personal significance for you of the orange traffic cones? I know it's a reoccurring motif for you, and it sprinkled its way into the show a little bit here too.
It did. So my work definitely leans on the transitional space, the transitional elements of urban construction, and I use traffic cones to sort of talk about how cities under construction, people are usually very frustrated. However, they're completely ubiquitous to construction. So they're everywhere. We don't pay attention to them. They're usually an irritant or there's something that tells us, but they're also a safety device. So I think that there's something about them that carries a lot of weight for the workers, but I don't include people. So I include them. They're like little figures in my work that move around. So now you'll never look at them the same, and I don't apologize.
They all have characters.
Yeah, they're little characters, and they're different. New York ones are those ones. We have different ones. Ontario has its own, so you learn a lot.
It's true. It's like walking signs and stuff in different
Quebec has
countries.
different ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Things like
you like architecture, as I can see,
Mhm.
and you said that you would like to continue your work in Ottawa. Unfortunately, Ottawa doesn't have those nice New York features, highline, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what would be attractive to you in Ottawa? Because I think we don't have those nice features, but we have mainly buildings.
Yeah.
So would you be looking at buildings?
So that's a really good question, because when Tiffany mentioned that the city of Ottawa purchased a piece, it was a very mundane Tunney's pasture building. And that's the one the city decided they wanted in their collection. I think that speaks a lot to the fact that Ottawa has functional buildings built in a certain way. We have Parliament, which of course stands out, but it's not my interest. Mine is what we're not looking at. So I love architecture that's just a bit more subtle, but I'm also interested in sort of the construction around architecture now. So that's been a big draw, is how is architecture changing with transit and everything. So there's a rapid amount of builds coming up in these condos and everything. So I'm interested in that a lot more. And so New York stands out as having different features for sure. And that's why this show definitely is a unique kind of tight series for me. And then going back to the Ottawa features, it's what we see all the time in Ottawa, but we don't tend to pay as much attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess an extension of that question would be, what photos are you taking of the city of Ottawa right at the present time?
I am
You find interesting.
deeply embedded in the LRT stage 2.
Oh.
So I have, that's what the second Green Shields grant is for, is to take photos and research and development of the construction elements. So how every station is being kind of transformed, but a huge focus on Byron, like where, you know, kind of this area where I live, and just watching it change and evolve. So all my photos are, you know, the tunnels, what I can see as a pedestrian right now. So it's definitely thousands of photos collected of each area.
So you're not granted special access to the
Not
site?
yet. I always am working on it, but I have worked with construction companies for different reasons, and they've hired me to come in and do one-off paintings for their sites, but LRT is my big passion project.
Yeah.
And we do have a question online. They say, I love the bench at night. Do you prefer working on a piece that plays with natural light or with artificial light?
Ooh, what a good question. First of all, I wanted one night painting in this. I actually love doing paintings at night. It offers a very different sort of abstraction to the whole architecture. So when it's, you know, daytime, you've got all the details, but night offers this very different kind of moody atmosphere. So I tend to work, my favorite light to photograph and take images for my work is actually the grayest, rainiest days. So that's actually when I love going out, because there's not harsh shadows, there's not a lot of, you know, I don't like skies with a lot of atmosphere. That doesn't interest me. It's too much. So I'm like, I focus in on, you know, kind of gray, muted colors with pops of color in it. So, but then a night painting always has this kind of moody environment. So I wanted to add one in, but.
Yeah, these are whole great subtlety, I think, in your
Yeah.
dark skies too. Like the more you let me get focused and pulled right into the center, and then the dark
Yeah.
sky has like a beautiful teal undertone.
Yeah, and I
So
did try
rich.
and get that unnatural light. This is all lit kind of from underneath the railings. But then other ones are mostly just from kind of plain times of day and very subtle in terms of not heavy shadowing. So
You find you're changing, you mentioned about your colleague in New York and the photos that he had. And it's obvious that the light color is jumping out at us.
yeah.
But I don't think you were doing that before.
No, I think that it's true. I think once I wasn't even really cognizant of it until I hung them or we looked at them all. And it was especially this painting, I'll turn towards this one here. This one really intense to me, but I think it was a combination of so many photos and then also trying to work from memory and trying to eliminate certain busyness. There's sometimes a lot of carts and there's a lot of noise in here. So I was working on kind of editing out a lot of extra things, which I tend to do with my work anyway, but it did change for this show. And I think that's why it's a nice kind of really kind of open close series. And then when I work with construction work, it tends to be a lot grittier, looser. And I think that's why the under construction one, it's even a little bit looser in terms of almost drawing with paint. So I let things kind of go a little bit more. Whereas this one's extremely overworked, and some of the other ones with the brickwork, they're very detailed. And I think I was paying attention more to trying to emulate the photograph provided as opposed to just letting things kind of go. So it is an interesting observation. I didn't even really see it until I hung them all up.
This one is New York too, right?
They all are, yeah. That's the one I spoke about. That's one of the relics. So that one, the High Line is only just hinted at the bottom with the railing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the old buildings that still exists. It does have more busyness in the front, but again, I kind of wanted to really focus on the kind of chipping away concrete. That green sort of decorative wooden structure at the top does exist. The side of it's actually bricks. It's almost like a little facade on the front. And they're just right, I mean, within feet of the railing. And those would have been considered, you know, at some point, not, you know, viable places to live.
Yeah.
And the intense switch to now living on the High Line is very desirable. So it's taken, but they're still there and they're still speckled within these incredibly modern buildings.
Here we have another question from Christy online. How long does it normally take you to paint one of the works?
Always a good one, and I never have a solid answer. So this series, it was on and off, so it's kind of hard to say. I started grad school as well, so I'd work on one. I'd say a painting could take about 2 weeks to complete, but I was working on a few at once, so I'd start to gather photos, maybe start 1 or 2, but I had kind of some starts and stops with it, and then when I got back, it was rapid to finish a few that had been started and then a couple of new ones. So it's, you know, 2 weeks to a month to kind of finish a painting, depending on the level of detail. There's the one with all the tiny bricks. That one I started and thought, why did I pick this one? But we're already invested, so let's keep going. Others come together really quickly. So it's such a funny thing because you'll think you look at one photo, or I look at some images and I think it's gonna take forever and it'll come together just like that. So it's really an unknown. So it's never, unless I have a strict deadline, which I do for this, it's never really a known thing. Yeah, I don't leave them too long. Once I started them, I can't leave them just for months or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did under construction come together quite
It did.
quickly?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was a fast one.
Flipping one.
Yeah, once I sketched it out, I was like, yes, you'll be fine. That one did not, though. There's the challenge. It's always the question of which one was the most challenging.
Mhm.
And I'd say this one with the fire escape. The angles are just very subtle. I zoomed in a lot, so there's a lot going on in the kind of in this environment. And so I zoomed in and decided to crop it, but it just had to get it just right to be convincing. And that's what's hard on these more subtle pieces.
Do you ever take artistic license and adjusting like proportions to kind of to deepen perspective or?
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes I'll eliminate, like there was even buildings kind of coming out of this. And I thought that's not going to work for this image because it's so closely cropped. And in the photograph, you could see even other images. So I definitely take liberties in that. I'll eliminate, extra elements within it, or tighten in sort of where the windows are, things like that. So I kind of adjust. And sometimes people will notice, depending on the environment, they're like, oh, didn't that have this? No, yeah, that's gone now. That's been eradicated. But it's or added in, like they'll add things in, but definitely the ones like at night or something, we're talking about how I can be more atmospheric with it. There's probably tons more lit up windows and buildings and things, but I just sort of decided to keep it pretty simple.
But you took some liberty here. If you look at, this is the old building.
Yeah.
And then the more you look at it, and then you see the new building.
Yeah.
Is it there or because you want to show something?
That actually is there. Yeah. So I really like that there was this kind of subtle apartment through this sort
Yeah.
of
But
yeah.
at first glance, you don't see
You
it.
don't notice
But
it as
it's
much.
just
Yeah.
by, and then
And
you
it
say,
kind
oh,
of needs something there because if you look, it could be too bare. So I have to kind of play around with what's needed, what's not, and how dark things have to be. So there's a lot of different kind of playing around, especially working from photos. Like it's not just one, it's like I said, several different ones. I did have him go out and take a certain angle of this one a few times because I knew I wanted this building. I've seen it for years and years. And so I sent him out to, that was the only time I think I dictated, like, okay, get out there and get that photo straight on at this time of day, because otherwise it was free falling, so. Yeah, there's just one. I think there's a lot more in real life. It's pretty hot. Can't imagine that's a really great place to be in the summer. But I just thought the one was all you needed. Yeah, so that's an artistic liberty. Taking up air conditioning units.
I have to say that you've taken images of things that I wouldn't think are beautiful, and you made them beautiful. Like,
Always my goal.
oh, yeah. But I mean, I would think that this could be beautiful, but they are.
Some areas now, because of the way they've developed it, are meant to be more visually appealing. But when you think of this place as being left and they were going to tear it down, it was considered an eyesore. And now that it's changed its entire persona. So it's kind of interesting how it was.
Are they introducing a lot of retail now?
Oh yeah. Oh, it's wild. It's something I've never seen. I think it's one of the biggest developments. Yeah.
Retail.
Yeah. So that's the Hudson Yards end is definitely, it's all retail. It's connected. Technically, you can just walk right onto it. It's really, I didn't expect that when I went there. I was a bit overwhelmed.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you see your body of work or your practice in general as like an archive? Like is it an archival process for you to document these spaces that are changing and like you're saying like these eyesores, quote unquote?
Yeah.
Like is that your part of your practice?
I like that because it comes in with the transit work, it comes into this. So if you look at, I've done, like I said, I've worked with the High Line since I think 2010, I think would have been the first time I kind of photographed it. So that's a long time now we're sitting here. So there are images and if I look back, there's parts that didn't exist yet and parts that like I couldn't access. So it would be a chronological change that way. And that's, it's also just more for myself too, for this project. It's a very personal space, traveling with my family down there for a long time. So I have a lot of personal connection to this outside of Ottawa. Ottawa's mainly my focus, but the documentarian thing for the transit is much more to try and capture that through the part that's chaotic. Whereas this is kind of still and calm. There's something chaotic about that I want to capture. So, yeah. So it's nice to revisit somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay, and one more question from online. Are you bringing the Highline exhibition to New York City?
Sure. Let's go. We're gonna that's not a plan in place, but I'm just saying glad. Yes, it's on its way.
else to come.
And new shows. I've made it aware. I'm just, everyone's been sharing it. It's been great, but yeah, it would be fun. There are some pieces down there. So there are some in the apartment, my friend's place. He has a view right on the High Line. So there we go. There's a High Line show. Done.
There you go.
It's complete.
Yeah, I mean, throughout our history, artists have had apartment shows, so there you go.
We'll do an apartment show, space them out.
Any more questions from the audience? No, okay, well, you feel free to enjoy the space.
Yeah, you can ask
Erin,
me any
you have
questions.
more questions. We do.
Thanks everyone. Sorry, yeah, just want to thank everyone who came online too, so.
Can you give us a little comment on the one that is behind that wall?
Oh, we are missing, yes, okay, one last one.
This one around.
The tedious brick painting. That's what I should have named it. No, just bricks. Yeah, so this space is a functional area where you can walk underneath, but I decided to focus on the, it's kind of got a little bit of everything. It's got the brickwork, it's got the foliage, speaks to kind of the intense kind of closed in areas too. It's very dramatic, I think more so than the actual space is, but yeah, this is one that's definitely has a lot more kind of loose elements too. So I think this was a halfway between painting. I sort of worked on it. I went back to this one a lot. I couldn't quite figure out kind of elements. So I think I definitely collaged a little bit together on this one in different seasons, but it's a kind of iconic area. That's the overpass that you can walk under, and there's vendors at Chelsea Market. It's kind of close to the one where the big intense railing, so you can almost connect those together as two paintings. So it's like a different vantage point of that.
We do have a printed out map, just at the front there, for anybody who'd like to have a look later. It does mark out where each work is located along the High Line.
Yeah, which was handy enough. It's like, thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, not a question, but congratulations.
Online.
And thank you to everyone who attended online as well. And yeah, just thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Eryn, you're so good. You have patience of a saint to do.
Oh, do
this.
I? Oh, yes.
We just are doing for a bill.
Yeah.